Okay, so this is a great video for anyone who wants to learn how to draw basically any animal from imagination, but we're going to focus on bird heads. And we're not just going to copy reference, but we're going to actually understand how to build them from imagination. Because this is where the true sort of wisdom lies in being able to draw really well. And I'm going to go through a clear and simple roadmap that I think is the perfect way to start drawing believable bird heads in this case, quickly and confidently from imagination. So by the end of this video, you'll understand like what it really takes to construct this head of a bird, how the forms connect, how the beak wraps around the head, and how you can simplify detail really well and convincingly, and even how to use color without over complicating it. And so then once you understand this, you will be able to invent your own birds with like real structure behind them. You don't have to rely too much on reference anymore. All right, let's get into it. As always, grab some coffee because it's going to be fun and I hope you follow along a little bit. So, number one, and this might sound a bit weird, but the beak for a bird, like this is literally where it all starts. And I want you to think of the beak not as a very detailed, complex thing at first, but just as a simple form. Like this is the first thing you should actually train. The reason we want to train this is because we want to train our intuitive perspective. If we don't have that, everything else following up to this is going to be harder to understand and actually apply. So do some exercises where you actually take boxes and you try to attach a cone to them, right? And you try to do that intuitively in perspective, and you try to be as accurate as you can, but also again not technically accurate. Just try to have some good common sense. And when you get more confident doing this, I feel then is when you start moving on into the next exercise, because the cone isn't necessarily like attached, stick to it. It's like it actually wraps around. So when you really look at a bird, the beak like flows over the top of the skull and tucks under the bottom jaw. And then it integrates into the sides of the face. So it's really like wrapping around a sphere. So what I like to do is I like to break it down into three main parts. You have the top section that overlaps to the bottom jaw, and you have this middle ridge that gives it that like strong aerodynamic shape. And you have these side planes that blend in to the head. So as you can see, when we break this up, we can really break it down into two or three main parts where we have this wrapping of the form around the skull, and then we have these side planes that integrate into it. This is what I mean with making your own puzzle pieces. It depends on how you want to break up complex shape. If it's easier for you to break it up into three shapes that then wedge into the sphere, that's fine. If you want to do more of what I would say are form wrapping technique, where you imagine the sphere and you create complicated forms around it. So similarly, let's say if we have, and we disregard this for a bit, if we have a cylinder, right? And this is what we do in our form exercises. And we want to create a more complex looking form. We follow the contour lines of the cylinder, right, to wrap around that part. And this form wrapping comes really in handy when you want to be able to do this, because you're literally you're wrapping a complex piece of geometry around the skull, or in this case, the elongated sphere of the head. So if you think about it like that, like top, middle, sides, or wrapping around, you suddenly have a beak that feels solid. It's not just a triangle stuck on a circle. And so once you've got that structure, this is where things start getting fun, because you can start playing with it. You can literally start having fun with the shapes that you understand, and you should. So here's the thing, drawing isn't about memorizing what the beak of a parrot is or what the beak of an eagle looks like exactly. It's about understanding the underlying structure that you know how to play with, and then you push and pull the shapes so that it resembles that of a parrot or it resembles that of an eagle or a heron or whatever, right? So you take that cone, you stretch it, you squash it, you curve it. If you elongate it and you make it very thin, you get something elegant like that of a heron or a stork. And if you compress it and you round it off, you suddenly have something more similar to what you see on a parrot or on a sparrow or on an eagle. And this is what I find to be the cool part of drawing. It's like the structure itself never actually changes. It's just like it's the same simple form underneath. You're just deforming it. You're manipulating its form. You're manipulating its form in order to explore new shapes. And that's how you go from actually copying reference all the time and relying on reference to designing things, designing your own things. And sometimes, because you understand these shapes now, you can break them as well. You don't have to adhere to what is used or what is normal or what. If you look at animation, they do this beautifully, right? They try to really break stuff. And there's an aspect to it where if you're good at design, you can make very sort of exaggerated shapes, but still make it work. But in the beginning, don't worry about that. Just try to be as silly as you can. Try to literally break it, right? Try to break your bird, so to speak, and see what you can come up with. Because you can always pull it back into reality, into the normal proportions, and then be confident with drawing them. Now, continuing with the eye is where a lot of the personality actually comes from, and you want to start with a sphere because what you're literally doing is you're wrapping around this sphere, you want to wrap geometry around it. So the brow ridge, the upper and lower eyelids, they're all geometry that you're actually literally sculpting around that sphere. So you're not just drawing a flat circle. And this is important to remember because, depending on the angle of the head, certain parts of the eye will then disappear or they will be covered because you're using that geometry. You're really using three-dimensionality. And the more you understand this three-dimensional structure, the more natural, actually, ironically, your bird will come together. So it stops looking like you just pasted a sticker on top of this skull on a flat face. It starts to feel like an actual living creature, right? And you can see that here. You want to really wrap around the sphere itself. It's the same with our eyes, right? With our lower lids, our upper lids, and our brow, it's the exact same. Although the proportions are a little bit different for birds, and again, we can play with that, but you do want to focus on this sort of more three-dimensionality when you add that to the skull. Just like what you did with the beak, you want to do the same with the eyes. And this is something we often tend to forget, is that we want to think about this three-dimensionality and how it sits on top of the simplest form we drew first. So we want to regard sort of that upper lid and that lower lid as a sphere that and you can exaggerate this in the beginning, right? You can literally like sculpt your way into it if you want to, as long as you keep trying to do that and keep trying to envision the three-dimensionality of what you're drawing. And it doesn't even have to be insanely accurate. It just has to be three-dimensional. Try to think of it in its three-dimensional sense, because if you do that, you'll train your spatial awareness a lot better. Everything for you becomes like building blocks that you start to understand. And now here's something that almost everyone struggles with, which is connecting the head to the body. And this happens with characters, but it also happens with animals. And if you're not careful, your bird ends up looking like a head that was just dropped on top of the body. And so the trick is to build the transition. And you want to think of that connection as a wedge, like as a wedging shape. It's like a soft, flowing form that links the head into the torso. And this is also what will give your drawing more rhythm and more flow. And it will no longer be like just circles and cones mashed together. You want to have this nice wedging flow. This series of connected, believable shapes that actually flow into one another. And so once you understand how that wedging works, your birds will immediately start to feel more organic and less robotic because there's no longer these rigid shapes you try to force together. And so the flow of how you wedge shapes together is something that I find probably a little bit more advanced, but it is something that you see with artists once they start to understand how to draw from imagination. It's not only about how they can connect simple form in space, but it's also how they nicely and organically wedge them together. It's the same with anatomy. When we start learning anatomy, we do it very rigidly, like a very boxy shape for the pecs, a very boxy like shape for the delts, a very boxy or like very crude shape for biceps and the underarms and everything. And once we start refining and we can better wedge and soften the wedging of these forms, they look one more believable and they just look better and it's easier to, or no, more pleasing on the eye, and the design just becomes overall more pleasing as well. And so that wedging, if you start to learn that wedging earlier on in your development, you'll have an easier time making good designs. And so you can really train this by taking, or we do this in the Artwod road for birds, is like we teach you how to wedge these shapes together. Even from the beak to the head into the neck, you can see that by understanding these wedges, you can, again, just like the beak, play with them, play with their volume, play with how you stretch them, how you warp them, how you basically manipulate their form to create something interesting, either something new or something that is based on a real animal, where you create the illusion of having drawn that animal. Now, when it comes to feathers, I know this is where a lot of people, they do lose their minds because they try to draw every feather individually, just like you try to draw every hair individually, and it's just a nightmare. And what I want you to remember here is that you don't need to draw every feather or every hair. Again, instead, you simplify them into clumps or masses. Like we do with ribbons for the hair, you do the same for the feathers. You think of them as like larger shapes that follow the form of the body, the form itself. So the feathers on the chest, they wrap around that spherical form of the torso. The feathers on the wings, they just follow that flat structure of the arm underneath. And if you group them in a certain way, in a pleasing way, they follow the direction of the form, it instantly starts to look natural and believable. And that's what's beautiful about this. You can keep the texture very subtle. You can let it show up near the silhouette or where the light hits the edges if you want to get a little bit more technical and designerly. And so that way you get clarity and structure and texture all at once. That is what's so cool about it. By actually simplifying things, you imply more, but you also get a better read of it. And it's about applying detail that is so important in drawing and even in painting. It's like, as you can see here, if we were to draw everything individually, it starts to look noisy just on this cylinder alone. However, if we think about these clumps, but we only apply them or we only indicate them at the edges and keep them lighter in the middle, we get this nice illusion of feathers and texture without actually drawing everything. But the important part is that we understand on what form they are attached, like what contour form they're following. And if you do that, then everything starts coming together. And by the way, this not only goes for hair and feathers, this also goes for fur, right? Everything like that has a certain texture, even when it comes to indicating like moss on a rock or something, it's the same thing. When we want to imply detail but not get everything too cluttered, what we do is we tend to just imply it in certain areas, break up the silhouette of that form a little bit so that we imply the texture, but we don't draw it everywhere. Okay, so you've drawn your heads, you can draw them from imagination. Now you want to color them, right? And this is where a lot of people tend to overthink color. And the truth is, you don't need 20 different colors. Trust me. You don't need 20 different colors to make something look good. What you need is a simple palette that works. Again, you want to simplify just like you do with structure. You want to simplify your color. And the rule we like to use is like one light color, one dark color, and an accent color to make things pop. Again, in the beginning, this is very effective if you struggle with color. So your light and dark tones will actually do like most of the work, and then the accent will sort of define or make things pop. They will bring out the things you want to bring out. And that's the fun part, you know? You use it sparingly, maybe on like the beak or around the eyes or on the tail, whatever you want. And that little pop is what gives your drawing more life. It's the same with texture. It's like little pops, little indications where you can emphasize things, where you can create a focal point. And then you can go wild with it, and you can really create some awesome designs by just keeping it as simple as possible and then having your creativity do the work. You can exaggerate proportions, you can make longer shapes, shorter shapes, you can use shape language like they do in animation to really, go wild, but still you're basing it on the simplicity of the form and the simplicity of the color. Pushing the curves, flattening shapes, twisting the form, anything basically goes because you now understand how everything connects. And I would say that is the key. You are no longer copying, you are designing. You're inventing. And I think that's all what we want to do. We want to be able to invent, even if we're looking at reference. We want to understand the structure so good that we can still play with what we're seeing, because then we get an artistic vision of what we're drawing. And so for me, this is the roadmap that you should start with. Start simple, understand the form, simplify the details, and then even the color, and then let your imagination take over. And if you keep practicing this way, by focusing on what is simple and structured and focus on how to make everything flow nicely at first, both your structure and your colors, then you'll really be on your way to drawing anything. All right, so with that said, I hope this roadmap gives you a little bit of context on what you can apply. If it's not about birds, you can do it about anything, figures, animals, whatever. We'll do this for more animals, obviously, but I want you to give this simplicity in a roadmap that you can really, really apply for yourself. All right? Again, as always, stay creative, stay drawing, stay consistent, and I'll see you in the next one.